And finally, the plane came to a stop. There was no flame. I was upright, and I was really fortunate. And I popped the canopy open, got off the plane, and then there was all these holes in the desert and these little marks in the desert. And I said, I know what those are. That's rattlesnakes.
Oh,
it was a movie moment. I took my helmet off and my parachute, and the plane had smoke and jet fuel all over the place. And I walked towards that dirt path, and it was a very sombering feeling, but I was walking and I was fine. The plane was totaled. I destroyed the airplane. But it was a very classic case of mitigating the risk, and I had a successful outcome ultimately.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. All right, Rebel HR listeners, extremely excited for this week's guest, Pete Zaccagnino. He is an aviation Hall of Famer, a 4 times air racing gold champion. He likes to live on the edge and is a living example of what it takes to be a true leader. With 23,000 hours and more than 270 aircraft types, flight tested over 685, and even built 3 of his own aircraft. He has some interesting stories to tell. We're going to be talking about leadership today. Some of his other credits: he is a film producer of multiple Discovery Channel productions and started a lead role in the Dangerous Flight series. He has a book out, Relevant. It is a behind-the-curtain thriller inspired by true events that reveal eye-opening top-secret encounters and the greatest lessons in leadership. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Kyle.
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned before I hit record, as I was preparing for this, I think we're going to have a fun show here. And if anybody fits the rebel mold, I think you've probably seen a lot of different aspects of this world. So why don't we start out with, how did you get into this business?
Well, aviation has always been my background, and or backdrop, you could say. And I've always wanted to be in aviation. I want to design, build, and fly airplanes. And I don't have any single event to point to or person, or, I'm the only person in the family that flies an airplane or is an engineer, and et cetera. And here we are. The only difference is I definitely did not pursue a classic career, that's for sure. And it's been, as a result, I think, super rewarding. I've worked with great people, and I've had great adventures, and super fulfilling halfway into it, and eager to see what the next half looks like.
No, it's awesome. And, I'm always fascinated, where the bug comes from to do something different or think differently or take a path that is less charted, to use a flight pun. So I want to talk a little bit about, leadership. And as we look at, our audience and some of the things we talk about, a lot of times it's really HR specific. And we talk about things like, employee development and diversity and those sorts of things. But interwoven behind everything we talk about is leadership. So as you look at, at what it takes to be a true leader, and as you look at the definition of leadership, how do you define it?
Well, I don't think leadership is that complicated, first of all. I think it's nonstop. It's always evolving. It is a series of questions. I use the question method often, and I'll explain in a minute what I mean by that. But of course, the people that support me need my support. And a good leader ensures that they're getting the support they need from myself. And I think that's paramount. So I have to support those that are supporting me. Then we have to give them the tools. And then we have to give them the ability to make mistakes. And in some industries, the mistakes have to be small because the consequences are so big. Aviation and flight test and air racing and some other of the crazy things I've been involved with. We have significant accountability and significant consequences. But we also have to be tolerant of the mistakes because the learning process from them is significant. And if we work in a mistake-free world, our growth is heavily limited. And it's not that we're tolerating a lackadaisical approach. It's just that creativity and alternative solutions often will have some hiccups and some false starts and other challenges. And you just have to get through those and learn from those. And what I tell everyone that works with me is it's real simple. I have a way of doing things, and it's worked, and I'm not dead. Let's be blunt. And so if you have a different way to do it, share it with me. And one of two things is going to occur. Either the person bringing it to me is going to learn from our discussion and encounter, or I'm going to learn and grow from them, and we will both advance is the ultimate goal here, and we will. And a good leader does advance with his support and his team. And he's not behind them. He's not in front of them. He's advancing with them. And I think that's a very critical perspective to have and share. And, culturally in an organization, what comes from that is an openness. And when people feel open, that's a big win in any type of organization. It doesn't have to be aviation or other aspects. It's just that openness is very tantamount to success. And I think that embodies leadership, really.
It's fascinating. I'll be honest, I didn't expect you to comment on openness as a leader as necessarily a good trait, specifically because of your background and the risk associated with doing something wrong. So walk me through how you approach managing the risk, because ultimately as a pilot, you're a risk manager, right? Like
big time.
You've got lives, literal lives in your hands every time you take that plane up. So how do you mitigate the risk or manage that risk and allow for the mistakes that are going to happen? Yeah,
so it's a big picture answer. Let's say we're test flying an airplane, which is a lot of my background was test flying aircraft. And it's not about that hero moment where we jump in the plane for the first time, we take it into the air and bring it back to the ground successfully, open the champagne bottle. It just doesn't work like that, right? That's the hero moment. But what goes into that and requires that openness is there's a ton of buildup to successfully testing that plane for the first time. And to successfully test it for the first time, there's a team of people. And someone could be changing a tire, changing a switch, a light bulb, which could be super critical because the LED light illuminates a failure mode in the aircraft. And if that bulb is out and you don't know that it failed, whatever that warning system's attached to, that could be a huge problem, right? And if someone didn't do a bulb check, a simple bulb check on the cockpit, and all of a sudden everyone's walking out to fire up the plane and go fly and have that hero moment, and they're like, I really need to stop them. He has a critical moment right there that the culture either supports him or dissuades him from doing. He could assume the bulbs all work and the warning panel is going to be fine, or he could run out there, stop everybody and say, I didn't check the warning system. That's part of my job and I need to do that. And he stops us at that moment. We want him to run out and stop us, obviously, but it doesn't always happen. So cultivating that openness is critical. And then if it's a private flight, like we're often doing with our business now, and we're taking a customer to Europe, the openness similarly is your co-pilot or co-captain sharing with you, hey, I didn't call Canadian Passport Services and get the COVID test clearance. Oops. But now we can deal with it, as opposed to we land in Montreal and they're all looking at us unhappily saying, what are you guys going to do about this, right? And because people make mistakes, anything that has humans involved, mistakes happen, period.
Yeah.
but that openness fosters a safe environment.
It's really interesting, and it reminds me of the kind of the studies on incentivization, right? So there's a lot of different types of incentives, and if you dress someone down every time they screw something up, you might be incentivizing them not to tell you,
right?
Actually increasing the risk of something really bad going on because they're not telling you when things are mildly wrong.
Right.
So yeah, that's fascinating. So obviously one of the things that I'm think is really interesting about your background is the test pilot thing. And I gotta think the level of confidence in your abilities when you get into this tested or untested plane and you hit start, how do you manage that? Like, what's got to be like a little bit of a gut check moment before you take this thing off the ground?
Well, that moment is the culmination of several events. And one of the things I like about the test flying world is the accountability. And you're super accountable because everything is culminating into that one moment when you're going to take that plane into the air for the first time. And so, yeah, there's kind of a pause, and for me at least, and it's pretty Zen-like where you're not getting amped up because that's not good, but you're also not passively sitting there in the plane. It's a combination of being very alert, very aware, but also the focus brings a calm, because the role is not risk elimination. The role is risk mitigation. Mm-hmm. You can't eliminate it. There's risk in everything. And so what we can do is mitigate it, be at a better airport, have done the due diligence on the design, have done the proper ground test, and that all mitigates it. So at that moment, it's here comes the accountability to the highest level, and you push the throttles forward and off you go, and with the plan of returning in a similar aircraft condition
without hitting eject.
Yeah, we don't want to do that because think about that, especially from your perspective. That company, whether it's a small company or it's a huge company, they're putting a ton of that corporate success onto your shoulders for that moment, and it's a really serious deal, and with massive outcomes. I mean, massive.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
It's just fascinating to hear that, the process that you have to go through, and you don't amp up, that you kind of go into the, an alert Zen state. I think, and I admittedly, I've never done that. I don't know that I necessarily have a corollary event other than, when you're sending that email to the entire distribution list and the corporation with that, whatever you're sending, and you hit send and you feel that. It's the closest thing I got, man. That's all I got.
It's a similar moment because you're going to be super accountable moving forward.
Yeah.
Right? You just put it all on the line because you hit the world button, right?
Yeah. All DL.
Yeah, there's no taking it back. You're done.
Or my favorite is the response to the all DL and BCC all, and then we're off to the races. But I'm sure many people have had that moment. But
yeah,
not quite as bad as an ejector seat in a test airplane. But it doesn't feel good.
No.
So So yeah, so I think it's just really interesting to talk to somebody from a fairly different industry, but there's so many different correlations that that you could draw there, and I love the fact that you brought out the fact that you can't eliminate risk.
Yeah.
And it's about mitigation. So walk me through maybe some stories or examples where you had you would have liked to eliminate risk, but you ended up just having to mitigate a circumstance to the best of your ability.
Well, here's a really good punctuating example. This was racing in a jet that we had returned to service, and it was a long process. And we won with this aircraft, took the gold championship in 2015 very successfully. But the plane did it kicking and screaming. It was a vintage jet. It's such a long, involved story, but it's interesting because in the subsequent year, I brought that plane back thinking, we're here to win again. And we're up on a race, and I had the loudest bang I've ever heard in an aircraft in my life, my career. And so bangs aren't good, That's in the bad category, right?
I understand that. That makes sense to me.
See, that makes sense, right? Bang is bad.
Yeah.
So I immediately came off the racetrack because we're down, 50 to 100 feet off the ground, and with a whole bunch of other aircraft. So I came off the racetrack. I was doing about 500 miles an hour, and I pulled up, and I was trying to evaluate what was going on, and it turned into a whole bunch of failure modes, and it's pretty technical. I had the side of my canopy had a hole in it, which made no sense. To this day, it doesn't make any sense. Not the front, not the back, but the side. Then I had a jam in a control, and I really thought I was going to have to parachute out of the airplane. And so I was going up, not vertical, but I was going up pretty steeply to get altitude, because altitude's your friend. And then I cleared out one problem and then another problem. The whole time the engine looked fine, and it's only one jet engine, and there's not a backup. And so I was setting up to land to try and figure out what was wrong with the plane, and it seemed landable. And then I asked for power, and it did nothing. There was no power. And I was like, this is really getting to be annoying. So I was rather annoyed, and I declared my third emergency on the radio, trying to get some help from the chase plane that is there to look over your airplane. And I came down, and I was set up to land in the desert, and I was down to about 500 feet over the ground. And I'm in survival mode and mitigation mode. So I didn't want the plane to flip over for all those bad reasons if it does, and I'm not landing on a runway or an improved surface. I'm in the desert in the sand. But there was this dirt path, and I was going to line up on this dirt path, and I thought it was a great idea. And it looked pretty good at 2,000 feet above the ground. So I'm latching a backup latch on the canopy so I can get out faster. I start shutting down pumps. Again, I'm reducing my risk. And I'm doing things with my hands so that if I do have a crash impact, my hands aren't going to break my wrists and things like that. So I'm doing all this crash preparation, and I made a final radio call, and I shut down the power to avoid sparks and fire and all that. So I'm lined up for this dirt path, and I'm getting down close, and right in front of me in the sage is this 3-foot cement pillar that was hidden, and I couldn't see it.
Oh, man.
And I go, well, this is bad. This is the bad category. So I ruddered to the left, and I moved the plane over to avoid it, and I touched down in the raw desert, and I flew the plane through the desert, basically trying to keep it upright. And what was interesting there was, through my helmet and mask and everything else going on, all of the Nevada desert was shoving into my face. It was unbelievable because it was parts and pieces were flying off the plane. So the desert was getting inside, and it was a tremendous amount. And it finally plane came to a stop. There was no flame. I was upright, and I was really fortunate. And I popped the canopy open, got off the plane. And then there was all these holes in the desert and these little marks in the desert. And I said, I know what those are. That's rattlesnakes.
Oh,
And it was a movie moment. I took my helmet off and my parachute, and plane had smoke and jet fuel all over the place. And I walked towards that dirt path, and I was very alone. It was a very sombering feeling, but I was walking and I was fine. The plane was totaled. I destroyed the airplane. It was not rebuildable. But it was a very classic case of mitigating the risk, and I had a successful outcome ultimately.
So I love that you're telling a story that in my mind I'm like, I would be like screaming in panic, red faced, and you're like, this was annoying. Calm under pressure, I think, is the maybe the tagline of this podcast.
Yeah.
So what do you attribute that coolness under fire to? Where did you kind of forge that mentality of mitigation?
Yeah.
And amid stormy skies.
Well, I mean, I learned early on by observation, by study, reading, listening to people who've done things successfully before me that, getting all excited and drama and all that doesn't help anything. I mean, it's just the opposite. Even your body releases chemicals that are unfavorable. And it's been with me for the longest time. I just don't get rattled, and I'm pretty calm about things. Unless I have to give a speech, and I'm pretty nervous. I get on stage, and everyone's staring at me. I'd rather be in the Vampire jet. But that is more intimidating to me, looking at 5,000 peers in an audience about to give a speech. But I've just really have worked for years on that whole concept of remaining very balanced during important events. And it's hard to describe, but you have to ascribe to it. It's not happening. And it didn't happen for me overnight, but I definitely was working towards that for years. Just that balance, I think, is the best way to put it.
That's really interesting. And I, part of me kind of goes back to, some of my thoughts on, our profession when we're dealing with like upset employees and things like that. Matching somebody's emotional outburst has never ended well.
Yeah, no. But hey, we're all human. I mean, it happens,
right.
And but that's got to be a tough role, because you need to empathically listen to them while representing the company and everything else. I mean, I think that's just a very challenging situation.
It's that's an interesting observation. It's one of those things I struggled with a lot early in my career, and I've talked about that on the podcast before, where I used to flip a switch where I would I'd be like me, then I'd flip a switch and I'd become like emotionless corporate drone person, right? And that was the only way I could get through like firing somebody, right? It's terrible. It was horrible. It's emotional. Generally I like to think I'm a nice guy. I don't want to fire people, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So, but I love the fact that you use the term balance, because I would say it's a very different journey for me, but a similar experience where it's like, listen, it's not about being emotionless. It's about maintaining the appropriate level of balance of empathy and emotion, and but making sure that you don't let the chemicals take hold of you, and you
Right.
got to let your your intellectual self present at times.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's spot on.
Fascinating. So we're going to keep this train going, because you got a bunch of stories, but I have to ask this question because I saw this on the sheet. So you've traveled to every country in the world except one.
Yeah.
So what does that country have against you?
Boy, I don't know, because we tried to get to it, and we had an engine failure in a different airplane trying to get there from South Africa. And that was going to be the big reveal. I finally got to Madagascar, and I want to see the little creatures and the vanilla. But I still have yet to go to Madagascar. And
okay.
But that too just happened organically. I didn't sit there with a list and start checking them off. It just kind of happened, and here we are. Learning as a citizen of the world, I think, is the best way to put it.
I love that. And I think, one of my favorite things about my job is we're an international organization, and I get to deal with all sorts of different cultures, attitudes, people, time zones sometimes, but it's just fun. It's dynamic. And so, having been so well traveled and having interacted with so many different types of people, what has that taught you as a leader?
Ooh, it's taught me a lot. The leader component is different because immediately some of the basic things you learn is how little the world knows about each other, and what we might label an area as poor or something like that. They don't see it that way in some cases, and there's a lot of rich people out there that we would probably label poor. And when you try to relate to them, I think that's the key to it. It's a bit of empathy, but they're trying to share their culture with you, the outsider that's there. And they're curious, and I'm curious, and there's this big exchange that occurs. They don't want a $5 tip. They want to share, and they want to understand. And I think there's that common thread, especially in the simpler cultures that don't have the complexities that have really dissected their brains to little compartments. They have a much simpler approach to life, and it shows what people need. And most people just need you to genuinely listen. I mean, genuinely listen to them and find that common ground, on a Venn diagram between the cultures. And when you find that common ground as a leader, and then the ability to connect between the people you're leading is far easier because you found this common ground. It could be just two people like football, right? But there's this commonality and what their needs are. And when you're around simpler people, you learn that their needs are very, very similar to very complicated people. And even though the complicated people have a bigger show and a bigger presence and bigger issues, it's still it's simple, really, what the needs are. You just got to get the distractions out of the way, and then listen to those people and find that pathway of communication so that the leadership occurs much more effectively. And it's two ways. It's between the people you're leading and the people doing the leading. It's a two-way communication. How's that for a simple answer? Not so.
Yeah. No, but I think it's so nuanced, right? And I think, but I think you hit on something that, we've talked about on this podcast, hundreds and hundreds of times, which is it's about connection.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And, empathy, but it's just, it's about the humanity in people. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And, there's so many cultures out there, their average life expectancy is like 45 years old. And they're not all wrapped around the axle about, all the things that'll make them live till 75. And their perspective is altered accordingly. And, all those little nuances, though, they add up to allowing you to try and find what's important for somebody. When you connect on what's important to them, they're going to listen to their leader even better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. It is really interesting to hear that perspective. And I think it's, coming from a country like the United States and looking at those, those differences in culture and, the simpler, maybe more collectivist societies where it's not about wealth, it's about, family and community and that sort of thing. Sometimes there's a certain prism that we see that in,
Right.
As opposed to taking the time to understand, okay, what are the goals? What do they want? What do they value? Have you found a commonality between somebody who maybe has their goals and objectives in a simpler context, also being happier?
That's a tough topic because of the type of work we do with private aircraft. I am around and heavily involved with very affluent, wealthy people.
Sure.
And some of my, friends will say, Pete, are they happy? They have that doubting question in their mind. And I said, yeah, no, they're really happy. I have really great customers. These are happy people. They're fulfilled. And the topic spreads to, well, is it the money? No, it's not the money. They're comfortable with what they've done. Because there's also people that are wealthy that almost feel a little guilty, I think. I don't have those type of people as customers, and I think it's just coincidence, but I have observed them. And they have this almost a guilt about them. Like, what did I do to get all of this? And I think it's back to fundamentals. It's not the money. It's that they weren't comfortable even before the money. And it just continued, and they didn't find the spiritual fulfillment that they thought they might have found. I don't know in their cases. So then when you come back to these simple cultures that I've been lucky enough to spend time with, there are people there that are very happy. They're very simple. They're very happy, but there's also people that aren't happy. And I don't think it is a function of the simplicity or the complexity. I think there's other things going on in both cases that are very polar opposites, right? But I do think there's the same issues going on. I really do. And whatever that is, I mean, I wasn't there for 8 weeks diagnosing these people, but, well, sometimes I was there longer than 8 weeks. But anyway.
No, it's just interesting. And, it's, from your perspective, you've seen so much. I am curious to understand, and I've just got to ask about this bullet point. So you've seen a lot, you've gone a lot of places. You've had some pretty crazy stories that have occurred. So, managed to get out of Russia after being refused to exit, got detained and bribed by some authorities, prevented some kids from getting kidnapped. So we're running out of time, but I want to open up the mic a little bit and say, all right, give me the story that's going to make some of these listeners' mouths drop.
Boy. Okay, here's the tearjerker. I'll give you a short one, okay?
Okay.
We partnered up with this, with just folks. It's just individual folks. And we fixed an orphanage in Guatemala at several locations. And it stopped the kids from getting kidnapped right out of the orphanage because we gave them security and concrete and really fundamental things that prevented the bad guys from, stealing these kids away. And it's been very successful since. The one of the big jaw droppers was probably in Pakistan when at 4 a.m. at a checkpoint, I had to get out of the car. The guns were pointed at me. I do not speak their language. I usually learn enough of a language to avoid the guns, and we're at this checkpoint and it wasn't going well. The driver that was my driver, they started yelling at him. They took him away. They put me back in the car. They shut the door. He left for about 30 minutes. It seemed like 4 hours. And I'm in the back of his car. I'm like, this isn't good. This is another case of bad. So I motioned to the guy that had more stripes on his uniform, and he came over. He was acting all angry at me, and I made some hand sign language, whatever, and got out of the car. And I said, "Can I take my picture with you?" So I pull out this little camera I was carrying back then, a digital camera, and I'm trying to take a selfie with this guy with the camera, and it wasn't working, right? And so he waves over some other guy with less stripes on his arm. He takes the camera, starts taking our picture. I go, "Hey, can I hold your gun?" And so he gives me his gun, and this is all through sign language and 4 words of English. I'm holding his gun, getting the picture. I'm like, "Hey, how about by the car?" And I totally turned it into this big. I'm going to make him look good because I'm interested in him, and it worked. And the driver comes back, and everything was like defused with me. But the driver comes back. And he's like, "Oh, they call me Captain over there." And he's like, "Captain, they refused my entry." I said, "Nah, it's all good. We're good. We're fine. We can drive on." And the head guy now is smiling and telling the driver that he's in trouble and everything's fine, but you can drive along. And it was all diffused. It was a hilarious scene.
That's awesome. I'm going to put that down on the list. Okay, next time I'm held at gunpoint, ask for a selfie.
Yeah.
See if that works.
I've used it a few times, actually, and it has worked.
What's so fascinating, though? I just love psychology. It's so fascinating. But that was a total ego play.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, yeah, I want to make this guy feel good about himself. We're going to have fun. Yeah, I mean, talk about it. Did he invite you over for dinner? And
yeah, we didn't break bread together, but I did hand him. Now I'm making a story longer. I handed him a business card. I said, "Anytime you're in America and you need help, you just call me." And he's like, "Thank you," and because I was genuine about it. I'm never going to see him again, but I meant what I said.
Guy gets to America, actually tracks me down, and says, "Hey, I need something." I mean, okay.
I'm going to help him.
Yeah, he helped you. There you go.
Exactly.
See, and so we're going to close this podcast on connection.
Absolutely.
What a cool story. And it's just been great getting to know you, and you're a great example of one of the guests that I just thoroughly enjoy this podcast because I get to meet people like yourself and get connected with folks with such cool stories, and appreciate you sharing your story with us here today. So
absolutely. I
do want to shift gears. I'm fascinated because you are a totally different guest profile. We're going to shift into the Rebel HR Flash round. So I'm curious to hear these. All right. First question. What is your favorite people book?
Okay. People book, if I understand the question, I'm going to say is Atlas Shrugged.
I have never read that book.
Oh, shame on you.
Required reading. Okay, got it. All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
We should be challenging. Do you mean let me back it up for a minute. Sorry. But do you mean on like an informational question?
It can be whatever you want it to be.
Okay. Who should we listen to? We should listen to people who have done it before us and have done it well. Don't listen to people with just opinions. Those that have done it well.
There you go. That is probably a really good caption for a lot of the news stories that you hear.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opinions out there.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you should listen to every single one.
No. Have they done it and have they done it well?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Coming from a guy who only has Madagascar to check off the list.
I know. I got to get there.
All right. Last question. Here's a toughie. How can our listeners connect with you?
Just email me. Pete@pazair.com. And I'll happily engage.
Perfect. Yeah, and we will have that information in the show notes. We're also going to have some additional details on the book. It is relevantthebook.com is the website. I'll give you an opportunity to plug. I know you're doing a series as well, so give us a little bit of detail on some of the work you're doing there. Sure.
Relevant is the series title and also the first book, and I'm really proud of how it's done. It's been great, and I enjoyed the process. It's just a tremendous creative process. Really enjoyed it, and so made the New Cold War, which is book 2, and the third book is halfway done as we speak.
Awesome, sounds good. So, and a military thriller inspired by true events. So, if you want to break reading the 490-page OSHA vaccine mandates, pick up a book and take your brain on a tangent that's actually enjoyable.
I think you learned something too. That was kind of the goal.
Perfect. Well, Pete, thank you again so much for sharing the time with us here today, and look forward to continuing to follow your journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. I hope we get to chat again, and next time I'm in Iowa, I'll let you know.
Let me know. I'll wave at you when you're overhead.
Yeah.
We got a lot of flyovers.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Take care.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. That does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.